if you're going to do a thing, then you ought to do it with excellence and you ought to get good at it, because the alternative of never getting good at anything and giving up on things quickly is obviously not ideal.
Welcome to Startup Dad, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of dads who are also leaders in the world of startups and business. I'm your host, Adam Fishman. Today, I'm excited to host Peter Kazanjy, author of Founding Sales, co-founder of Atrium, and a serial entrepreneur. Peter has written the canonical book about founder-driven sales and early-stage go-to-market efforts. Perhaps even more importantly, he's a husband and the father of one son. Today, we talked about he and his wife's IVF journey with their son, quarterbacking the delivery room when his son was born, systems for making quality time, why the calendar is destiny, and how to build capabilities, grit, and concepts of duty in your children. I learned why he considers himself a Tiger Light dad, and some other books he's created through a process he calls vibe writing. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe to Startup Dad on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Welcome Pete Kazanjy to Startup Dad. Pete, it is my absolute pleasure to have you here on the show. I'm very excited for this, so welcome.
Thank you. I'm super pumped to just do dad jokes back and forth.
That's all we're going to do.
That's all we're going to do.
65 minutes of rapid fire dad jokes.
And shots of coffee.
And shots of coffee. We both have our mugs. We're all set. I wanted to give a special shout out before we dig into the episode here to the first ever Startup Dad guest, Nick Selman, for connecting the two of us. Nick recently merged his company. So congrats, Nick. This is going to be lit, as the kids say. I'm pretty excited for it. So a lot of people, myself included, will know you as the founder-led sales guy. And in fact, you did publish a book with that title. But I think very few people will know you as a dad to a 7-year-old son, Michael, and a husband to a super talented designer, Tracy, who I think did all of the illustrations in your book and the cover art. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. So tell me about your family.
Yeah, so we live in San Francisco. My son Michael just completed second grade, and he goes to Chinese American International School, where he's one of the few little Anglo boys running around, and now speaking Mandarin very effectively and making fun of my pronunciation. And and as you noted, my wife Tracy is a designer. She's also an entrepreneur. She runs a company called Mascot Works that does like physicalization of marketing assets for largely for B2B software companies. She used to be a buyer at Williams-Sonoma, and then also she went back to school after I sold my last company to do graphic design. And so we live in the Alamo Square area and love living in San Francisco.
Yeah, very cool. In the acknowledgments of your book, Founder-Led Sales, you mentioned both Tracy and Michael. You also talked about your parents and your brother. So how have those three people influenced your life?
You know, I think that I'm like highly representative of kind of the things that, made them them. My mom was a teacher, administrator, professor of education, etc. My dad was a aerospace engineer who, I guess this is like now popular again in Southern California, but in the 70s and 80s, like technology entrepreneurs, at least in Southern California, you did aerospace companies, you didn't do software companies. So that's what he did. When I was growing up, he started and sold a couple aerospace companies back in the day, but I kind of consider myself like a fairly representative like admixture of the two, where I have a very engineering kind of mindset as relates to how I approach go to market, sales strategy, and then also I have a non-trivial amount of like teaching stripe to me as well, which is important for marketing, education, those sort of things, like when you're taking a product to market, but also just educating the broader community as well as relates to things like sales and go to market and so on and so forth, which of course my book Founding Sales is probably the best example of that.
Cool. What about your brother? He was mentioned too.
Yeah, so my brother, Michael, is actually named after his uncle Mike. And so he was 4 years younger than me. And he actually passed away in a skiing accident in 2013 or
Wow.
so. We talk about that a lot in our family about like we talk about Uncle Mike and what Uncle Mike liked to do. I think it's just like it's very like it's a good reminder of how reality can kind of like intervene, and that you should be mindful of those things and kind of make the most of your day to day, because you never know when those sort of things might happen.
Yeah. And how amazing to honor his legacy by naming your only kid after him too.
Little Mike has some serious Uncle Mike stripes in him as well. Kind of more rambunctious, more disruptive,
Yep.
etc. I was like the perfect older brother for a sibling, and Uncle Mike was a little bit of a rebel, and
Little.
so little Mike kind of has themes of that going on.
Okay. Well, speaking of little Mike, I was surprised, impressed, astounded. I don't know which adjective to use. To learn that he was the product of 7 rounds of IVF. There are a lot of people who are listening to this show that might be going through that themselves. And so I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about that journey to get to Michael.
I'm 45. My wife is 5 years older than me. She's 50 now. But when we kind of first started on our fertility journey, I was 33 and she was 37, 38. And I think that at the time we were unaware of like the common case of like substantial fertility decline in like ovarian reserve of most women kind of post age of 35. But that so like that was the first thing, and I think that people are more and more aware of this, and also it's something that is like more and more like acceptable to talk about. I think the other thing though is that even for folks who are younger than that, there's high variability in ovarian reserve, and as kind of reflected or testable very easily through what's known as follicular stimulation hormone testing. And just people just don't end up kind of knowing their state, if you will,
Mm,
in bad cases until it's too late. There was a woman named Ashton Vetchery who had a company called Modern Fertility that was acquired by, I think it was acquired by 23andMe, if I recall correctly.
hmm
Anyway, like I met her at a party and we were discussing this about like the whole idea behind her startup was that to essentially abstract ovarian reserve testing from the egg freezing process, which is normally for women who ever get their FSH tested, get that earliest on. My biggest takeaway from all of this was that people just need to be like more open and talk about these sort of things,
hmm
because then people can kind of act accordingly. But so anyway, all that is to say that if we had known, we would have started earlier, kind of been more proactive about that. But kind of faced with the cards that we had, conveniently we're kind of high grit people. And it was one of those things where we would just get one or two what are known as follicles, essentially productive eggs per cycle. And so that just over 6 or 7 cycles there eventually accreted enough embryos in order to do an initial implantation cycle, which Michael was the successful product of, and then a second implantation cycle, which was not successful. And so all of this was conducted through the UCSF Center for Reproductive Health, which is absolutely fantastic. Kind of another thing is like we're blessed to be here in San Francisco and the Bay Area that have access to all these great resources. I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is that people should be aware of these things early and often. The good news is there's clever entrepreneurs doing stuff to make that accessible and easy.
hmm
Whereas, historically, it was less accessible and people were less aware of it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think the conversation has really changed quite a bit since you started, what,
Yeah.
12-ish years ago to now. Was there ever a point where you and Tracy, were going through this and you thought about giving up or stopping, or did your just innate grit kind of power the two of you through it?
So I don't think there was ever a time when we thought that we would stop simply because like the leading indicators were there. We're like, okay, cool. Like it just turns out that this is the number of follicles that are being presented in any given cycle, and like, and then you just do the math. And you're like, all right, cool. I guess like we can do 4 more of these. We had the financial resources in order to kind of do that. I would imagine that in scenarios where people were like, it doesn't look like there's a path, there might have been a different story. But the good news there is that again, there's like a lot of thoughtful entrepreneurs that are doing things to kind of help facilitate that. Where if for whatever reason you can't be successful with your own genetics, there are folks who are kind of helping to facilitate that through like donor matching or donor banks or what have you. I forget the name of the company that's doing the sponsored egg freezing where women can get their eggs frozen for free, and then at the same time donate that to an egg bank to folks that can't have kids with their own
Yeah.
genetics. The point is that like one of the things that I have strong conviction about, and I talk with my son quite a bit, is that like thoughtful, creative entrepreneurs can like any problem is solvable, right? And I think that you're kind of seeing that with fertility as well over the last 15 years after a time of like, maybe 15 to 20 to 25 years ahead of that, that kind of like change perceptions of family creation and structure and so on and so forth, which now some people kind of find themselves on the back foot as a result of that prior kind of time period, if you will. And so now there are people who are scrambling and kind of like technologists who are seeking to solve those problems because that now they're motive. And that's just essentially the circle of life of like problem arises, people are unhappy with it, and then somewhat, and then a set of folks put their mind to potentially solving it and utility ensues.
If somebody was going through this process today or listening to this show and maybe feeling a little hopeless or feeling like this is a slog, and I don't know if you talk to people just in your everyday life, but what would you tell somebody who might be experiencing this themselves?
I think everyone's kind of experience is going to be unique to them. I would say that even though the process is highly laborious and fussy, and it's not like anything is particularly wildly painful or what have you, especially for the man. Um, and then people are like, okay, well, was it worth it? I'd be like, and I'm like, yeah, totally. I would like, do it again times five, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think the point is that like the juice is worth the squeeze there. So to the extent that like there is a path, I would encourage folks to continue to advance against it.
Well, and so you got Michael after many rounds of IVF, and I'm curious what the earliest memory you have after becoming a dad was.
So Michael was born on the 4th of July, and he was actually, due, I don't know, like 3 weeks later or what have you. Michael was born at CPMC in San Francisco, which is like where pretty much all the babies in San
It's the baby
Francisco.
factory of San Francisco.
It is
Yes.
the baby factory of San Francisco. We had a pretty eventful delivery there, which is like now seared into the memory. So I guess the question is like, what's the earliest memory after becoming a father? It's like, well, there was like the shit show, there was the delivery, and Michael was delivered via a vacuum delivery, right? The modern forceps delivery. I guess his head is too giant. So we had a bunch of drama, and typically I have like this private kind of Google Doc that I share with my buddies who are about to like have their kids, and then I have like a live conversation with them where I kind of like do some coaching around like, hey, like, look, you're a thoughtful person. You shouldn't edit yourself if something seems wrong, right, or weird. Like, you should feel free to speak up because, yes, we've all been indoctrinated that like, doctors are infallible or what have you, but it just turns out as soon as you learn the definitions of the different words that are being thrown around, like you can kind of reason against them. And probably the best example of this, we were sitting in the room and they were going to do the vacuum delivery. And so when that happens, typically what you do is they bring in the neonatal ICU folks just in case, right?
Mhm.
Hopefully it's not needed, but you just do it just in case. They have to bring those folks in, and of course the OB's there, et cetera, et cetera. And so like we were kind of waiting for that to happen. There were a bunch of people standing around, and I was like, "Are we going to do this?" Like the baby is like half kind of out of the birth canal, and they're like, "Oh, well, we're waiting for the the ICU folks." And this is again another example of how when you approach these things maybe for the first time, you don't realize is like these people don't work together. Like the OB has
Right.
like they have hospital privileges, but like they don't know this. You're like, oh, Bob, hey, what's up? Right? They don't necessarily know these people. So at that point, I was just like, okay, if you're from the NICU, raise your hand. And like 3 people raise their hand, and I'm like, okay, can we go? And they,
They're here.
and they were like, oh, okay, cool. And so that happened. I know it was great. So they were doing the vacuum delivery, and the OB, who was great, was pulling on Michael's head with the vacuum, and the vacuum like popped off.
Oh, no.
Was great. Because there's like a spray, which was amazing. And then and like the vacuum kind of broke.
Oh
Ish.
no.
I don't think it like broke or whatever. I don't know. It's just like the handle got weird or whatever.
Yeah.
So she was like kind of sitting there, like going like this, and then like the delivery nurse was next to her, and they were both kind of like poking at it or whatever. And I was like, "Hey guys, do you think there's another one?" And they're like,
yeah.
and they just like went on the hall, got one, and just like were on their merry way. Anyway, like it's funny in retrospect, but at the time it was like peak
Yeah.
like entrepreneur shit show where like at your software company or whatever company, like things are always fucking breaking. And so like, this was kind of the similar situation, but like in the delivery room. And so this is why I tell folks like, hey, it's like don't turn your brain off, like you're able to do these sort of things. So I guess he was like still in there, so I don't know if I was a dad yet or whatever, but like these are pretty good memories and highly didactic as well.
Oh yes. I'll count it. I'll allow it for the
Okay.
purposes of this show and great content creation. I just love that you went like full on startup CEO in the delivery room, and you're like, all right, I'm just gonna quarterback this thing. Everyone's kind of standing around, not knowing each other, and you're like, all right, let's do an icebreaker. Who's on this team? Who's
Yeah.
on this team? Oh man, wow.
Yeah.
Well, what a world we live in.
These are important capabilities,
Yes, very important. Well, I'm very glad that all went well, that Michael is here, that they found another vacuum. Turns out there's more than one at CPMC. They probably deliver like
I know,
150
exactly.
babies a day. So I am curious now that Michael is here and he's 7, and you are a founder and an author and a busy guy who comes on podcasts and talks about fatherhood. You've got to have a bunch of systems for making time and kind of compartmentalizing your time and managing that effectively. One of those systems, I think you said calendar is destiny. So what does it mean that calendar is destiny?
This is something that we talk about quite a bit at my company, and also that like is highly like relevant to sales organizations, which run on essentially like operating rhythms. Like your day should look like this. If you are an account executive, your day should be structured like this. And so highly successful organizations are the ones that have strong operating rhythms, that have the content of what needs to be done at those given times. So like they have a recipe of like what ought to be done at what times and how frequently and so on and so forth. They also have the content of what ought to be done within those various blocks and the different kind of like meetings and time intervals and so on and so forth. As Michael was ceasing to be kind of more of like a larval entity and turning into more of like a dynamic proto-human, I found myself in a situation where like being reactive was kind of like tough because like, you would, find yourself just like overwhelmed with lots of stuff and you wouldn't necessarily have time to do things. And so I kind of like patterned some of what I do like for making quality time with him through just structuring your day, week, month, quarter, year in a way where these things kind of come back up again, right? So whether that's like making sure that like there is a structured like I'm going to take these delivery periods or what have you, like during the summer I take him to his camps as an example and we commute together, right? And like that's something that I've like baked into my operating rhythm as a executive is essentially this like hour and a half block where we actually take Muni together, which is super fun because we get to hang out and like talk, and like there's just all sorts of things that like show up in the environment which then act as like little seed crystals for discussions and kind of like teachable moments and so on and so forth. So like that's an example of like something that's in my operating rhythm now, and so like that time is blocked. And so oftentimes what I'll do is I'll take calls earlier in the day, like I'll take 6 a.m. calls or 7 a.m. calls with the East Coast or Europe, such that I can have that 90-minute block. That's not we're not commuting the entire 90 minutes. It's like part of that, and then of course like it's getting back to the office and playing my favorite video game, email, the whole time on the way back. But like that, so like that's a good example of that. Is like making space on the calendar, and then I do the same thing like on a monthly and quarterly basis as well. So I have a bunch of stuff scattered throughout the calendar as reminders to like the week associated with his birthday, right? Do the same thing in anticipation of like the holiday season. So set that up. I like to take him on various kind of like excursions in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so we have an inventory of those things that we like to do on a recurring basis. Not you don't go whale watching like multiple times a summer. You maybe go once a summer, but then you don't want to forget to do that and accidentally skip a summer. So an annual recurring meeting invite, right, that just recurs, that reminds you to then like put that on the calendar or other things like that from the inventory of things to do, can be very effective. And so that's what I mean when I say, have a good operating rhythm, which means like slots on the calendar that are for these things. And then not only have like the space that is burdened on the calendar for that, also have like recurringness to like remind yourself to like refill those
Yeah.
slots from your inventory. And then the other thing I've been doing quite a bit is like publishing these sort of things. So Google Docs is like kind of my favorite content management system for this, just because my blog on Subtle is a pain in the ass to do, to write in Markdown. I guess with like LLMs, I could probably do a better job of that. But like I've synthesized like all those things on like what what a dad with a curious kid in the San Francisco Bay Area could be spending their time on, because it's just like an inventory of probably like I don't know, like 30 things that then you could just pop into the various slots.
That's awesome. And is that something that you've built over time? Did you do like a concentrated research period trying to figure out? Or was it kind of driven maybe a little bit by Michael too and what he's into?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started out as like something where we're like, okay, cool, like we want to go, and there were things that me and my wife like to do, like hike up to the top of Sutro Tower. There were things that I grew up doing with like my dad, going whale watching or like going to the exploratorium or what have you. And then I think we just ended up kind of like accreting other things over time, and then just like updating the relevant documentation such that it's like in the inventory to then pick from for next time, right?
Love that. What is Michael's favorite thing in the inventory to do?
Probably our favorite thing to do together is go to the exploratorium right now.
Oh,
That's
that is a great
it's probably
place.
the a number one thing there. Prior to that, he liked to go to the California Academy of Sciences and go into the earthquake house and so on and so forth. But then once
Yeah.
he got to the point where he could read, the exploratorium was a lot cooler for him, because now he could like decipher what was going on with the different exhibits, so on and so forth. So
Yeah. I'm a pretty big fan myself. Second thing that's super important to you, and you did a whole podcast on this, is this idea of instilling concepts of duty and kind of teaching Michael about that. So, what does that mean? What does it mean to instill a concept of duty? And how does that work in your household?
if you are highly capable, and Michael is, his father and his mother are both highly capable people, and it comes from a long line of highly capable folks, then you have a duty to make use of that for your family, for yourself, but also other people in your life. And so just kind of instilling that discipline and rigor, and also the fact that like this is an important thing that you need to externalize for your community. Yes, for for commercial success, which is what we do as entrepreneurs, right? Is we use our capability for commercial success, and like in doing that, obviously benefit the community as well through like commercial, like mutually beneficial trade, right?
Yeah.
The crux of how our economy works, but also just externalizing that as well, right? So like we talk about the importance of keeping our neighborhood clean and looking out for other people, even though there's maybe not necessarily any like immediate upside for us. When you come from a place where you have privilege and capability, I believe that it is your duty to leverage that individually, right? The same way that like your father and mother and their fathers and mothers and their fathers and mothers have done before that, because you are the beneficiary of all of that, and you kind of live in a sequence of that. So you ought to do that, but also do it outside of your family as well.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Michael take those lessons and sort of independently model that behavior?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's getting to the point where he starts doing that. It's more, you see it at school, right? Where
Hmm.
if the kids are, doing crazy stuff or whatever, and someone is, engaging in their base instincts of like, let's leave a bunch of junk on the ground, or let's like let's be mean to this other kid, or what have you. And instead Michael intervenes, or like, or even minimally like cleans up after other people. That's a very, very
Hmm.
basic example of that, but like just the base concept of like reducing entropy in the world and being
Yeah.
like a smart like actor um is like the first step there, because then that will then lever up over time into other like more grandiose versions of that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And it's working. Way to go.
Mhm.
You describe yourself to me as a little bit of a tiger light dad. So many people may be familiar with the concept of a tiger dad or a tiger mom. But what is a tiger light dad?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's related to the prior thing, which is just like I think that instilling in your kids that if you're going to do things, you ought to do things well and with rigor and through completion, all those sort of things. I think the notion, some of these concepts, at least outside of like first generation immigrant families, have been a little bit less received wisdom
Hmm.
versus do what you want, follow your bliss. I think that trying things to see what it is that resonates with you is good, but also you're never going to figure out what you're going to be excellent at. And then moreover, you're never going to acquire the skill of being able to become excellent. And then there's like the meta skill, which is the ability to acquire a new capability. You're never going to acquire that skill of like skill acquisition if you are, flitting from thing to thing to thing to thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Versus buckling down and actually breaking through the initial parts that are difficult and then don't come naturally. And I think that that's something that over the last like 20 to 30 years has been kind of like lost. And this is something that is like a fairly hot topic in our industry, is around kind of like the decline and like lethargy of sales performance that is driven by a variety of drivers. But I think that this is something that at least I want to make sure that my son is not subject to, because I think that the outputs of kids who come up in a planktonic, right?
Hmm.
Like they're plankton and kind of just like, going this way and that way, and versus like driving towards something, it's not good. I've read all of Jonathan Haidt's books on these topics, and a number of others as well. And I think that, directed, not like strict swim lanes, right, are exactly what's needed, but certainly like the general concept of if you're going to do a thing, then you ought to do it with excellence and you ought to get good at it, because the alternative of never getting good at anything and like giving up on things quickly is obviously like not ideal.
It sounds like what you're trying to do, and you can describe it as being tiger light dad. You're really just kind of instilling this concept that you and your wife follow, this concept of grit, trying to find a way to instill that in your son and model that for him and give him that like stick to itiveness, for
Yes.
lack of a better term. So
Yeah, for sure. And like probably the best example of this is so Mikey he's a really good soccer player now. He's young for his age because he was, he's like a late July baby. And so when he started out in soccer, he was like fine, but he was definitely not at the head of the class. And he was kind of frustrated by that. And we talked about this and we said, like, okay, well, Mike, do you want to get good at this? He was like, yes, I do. This is probably when he was like 5. And I was like, okay, well, if you want to get good, then there are things that we can do in order to make it such that you can get good at this. But it's going to require things like we can find a soccer tutor for you, and we can allocate the time to do that, and like we can do that on a weekly basis or what have you. But when it's time to go to the soccer tutor at 8 in the morning on Sunday and you don't want to get up, we need to actually do that because we're not going to do it halfway. And so we did that over it's like a 12-month period or 18-month period or what have you. And he progressed, but like with all these sort of things, what ends up happening is it compounds over time and kind of like levers. And 6 months in, he had gotten dramatically better than he had been previously. And so he then recognized that because on his team he was scoring a bunch, and and then importantly all the kids were like, oh my gosh, like what happened, like what happened with Michael. And so that was a very important lesson for him of like, it's cute that you have a 7-year-old who like is having fun, being successful at soccer, kind of like having the kind of adulation of their peers. And that's an important thing. Like, you want your kids to have those opportunities that are real and not fake. But the bigger thing, of course, in this case was, and this is what we talk with him about, is like, okay, well, do you remember back here where we were and how we committed to do this, and then we did, and then this is the outcome associated with that. And so I think that like really harping on that and saying, okay, cool, and then the next time that happens where you're like not where you need to be, and then you create a plan of how to make yourself better, and then you get there, and so then you execute the plan, and to get there, then you emphasize the fact like, that was one of those things again, right? Like
Yeah.
you built capability.
Yeah.
Because once you have that meta ability, you can do it anywhere in your life, especially, post LLM and what have you, where like focus and agency and so on and so forth are like kind of the only blockers to like new information or like, doing things.
And I mean, the meta capability there is, if you want to be good at something or excellent at something, and you commit to putting in the time and the work, which it's hard, and have that grit, like you can be excellent at something. You mentioned this about entrepreneurship, right? The technology is there. We can make whatever it is that we want as long as we stick to it and work really hard at it.
Yeah. And I think this is something that I talk about certainly in founding sales, where like the whole premise of founding sales and like the concept of founder-led sales, which is like kind of was a coinage that kind of cascaded off of the book, is that people have these erroneous beliefs that folks are natural XYZ, like, oh, you're a natural seller or what have you. And it just turns out that it's just a skill that you acquire over time, and you just have to, you need a recipe to follow, and then B, you just need to like do it again and again and again and again. And maybe you have coaching, or maybe you just do it by trial and error yourself, following the recipe. The notion of like learning and growth, and the fact that like it's your responsibility and it can be done, is a really important thing, like in startups, for entrepreneurs, for your staff,
Yeah.
in organizations as well, who may have self-limiting beliefs, and certainly for your kid.
Yeah. I mean, you sort of just described the genesis of the growth mindset in a way there, which is like innate ability. There are definitely some outliers that have innate ability
Of
and
course.
can just do a thing,
Yeah.
naturally gifted. That's not most people. most people have to work at something, and you're teaching your kid and your employees that you get results when you work at something. So I think that's awesome. One piece of advice that you give to new dads, which I loved hearing about, was that certainly, people take pictures and things like that of their kids, but you said recording video and then especially audio is really important, and that dads should do that, parents should do that. So, what is it about audio that you find so important?
I have this video of Michael laying on my chest when he's probably like, I don't know, 5 days old or 7 days old or whatever. And he's making these like funny little like grunting noises or what have you. We take pictures and we take videos of things that are like visually arresting, like, oh, he's walking, or look at him like rolling around, et cetera, et cetera. That's fun. And you're going to naturally do that. But you don't think to video record the sounds. And the sounds end up actually being really like emotionally arresting. Tracy and I have a whole album of, it's called the Sounds of Astro. So Astro was Michael's code name when he was in utero. And so what ends up happening is like you accrete these, like not just when they're a newborn, but you know how it is, right? When they're 6 months old, they sound a certain way. When they're a year old, they sound a certain way. They start saying silly things, they start babbling, all these sort of things, especially when they start talking. And I think an important thing there is that the things that they say or the sounds that they make are highly ephemeral, right? They're only there for like a month or like 3 months or whatever. And then they like learn to say the word the right way. And the old way that they said it that was so funny and cute is like gone. And so to the extent that you can record these things and kind of persist them off, I find myself typically where I end up kind of consuming this is if I don't have Wi-Fi on planes.
Oh, I love that. Also, great use of no Wi-Fi on the airplane, which seems like it never works when I need it to. So now I have something else to do with my time, which is great. We talked about systems and calendaring and kind of organizing and prioritizing your time. I am curious if having Michael 7 years ago changed how you structure your professional life.
I sold my first company in 2014, and then we pretty much immediately started that kind of the IVF journey. Michael was born in 2017, and Tracy was doing. She had gone back to school to do her graphic design degree at the time, and she hadn't completed it, and so she went back to school to complete that after Michael was born. And so she wasn't working, and so she was pro mom, and so for the most part, at least in the early parts of Mike's life, Tracy was able to absorb a lot of the logistics associated with that, et cetera, et cetera. But now, as Tracy's gone back to do kind of her own kind of entrepreneurial experience with Mascot Works, I've been doing the things that we described earlier around like kind of structuring things from a commute standpoint and so on and so forth. But like I think what ends up happening there is like you can do time shifting things that otherwise you might not think of that end up allowing more kind of like quality time. I think the important thing there from a startup standpoint is to just like make that very clear to like your staff. I get in the office at like 9:30, but externalize the 6 and 7 o'clock calls.
Right. Right.
Right.
Here's what's happening leading up to that 10 a.m. arrival.
Yeah. And I think that this is something that I think it was really problematic. This is all just like the result of ZERP and the run up to ZERP as well. I mean, like good times leads to soft entrepreneurs, soft professionals, etc. Yeah, you had things where it's like, oh, you really shouldn't send Slacks after hours because you might create this expectation. And I think that that's like utter bullshit because as a founder, you're like the high watermark in
Yeah.
terms of like level of effort. And so like externalizing those sort of things end up being very important. So the point is like as you are, changing your schedule or your structure or whatever, I think it's like you can do that, but then it's also really important to make sure that like you are externalizing your efforts in a way that is easily consumable to your staff as well, so they don't get, confused.
Reflecting on the last 7, now almost 8 years of Michael's life, and early happy birthday to him, and to America. So I'm curious what you would say in reflection is maybe a mistake that you've made as a dad.
Probably the high order mistake that we made, or that I made it as a dad and we made as parents, was, at least in our case, not being as aware of like our fertility situation as we would have preferred, because if that wasn't the case, Michael would probably have siblings. There's that. And I think that probably the other mistake was not getting as on the front foot as I like now. Subsequently, I'm spent a lot of time with Mike. It's very well structured. He gets enough of me. I love spending time with him, but as a 7-year-old, he gets his fill and is like, okay, cool. Probably could have gotten on that probably a year earlier. And I think that was like one of the things that kind of motivated, all right, I'm going to get like rigorous around this. We're going to have the different things that we want to do. We're going to have times like slotted for that. We're going to have a system by which to rotate these things onto the calendar. We're going to make sure that this happens. Was kind of in a reaction to that, like, oh man, I haven't been doing a good job of this. Okay, let's fix the shit out of this. What would have been ideal is to, for me, 5 years ago or 4 years ago, to have heard an episode like this and be like, yeah, you know what? I need to get on that. Right. And hear that when Michael was 2 and kind of just like, rolling around on the ground or what have you, or sorry, kind of toddling around. Right. Then figuring it out when he was like 3 or when he was 4.
I guess the lesson there is like, think about kind of everything a little bit earlier. So fertility a little bit earlier, how you're going to manage your time, like do that when your kid's still a potato and sort that out so that when they're a whirling dervish or whatever, a Tasmanian devil, you're in a good place. So I'm not sure that many people listening to this will know this about you, but you went to school for English and you ended up running tech startups, writing a book about sales for founders. You've spent pretty much all of your career in technology, but I've noticed that you still write things, and obviously you wrote a book and that sort of thing. So that's an interesting juxtaposition, right? And so I'm curious how that has influenced, or if it has influenced, the relationship that you want your son to have with technology as he gets older.
I think that they're not as conflicting as one might think, right? So as I was mentioning earlier, my dad was an aerospace engineer. My mom was a teacher and a professor of education and what have you. I think that English is really the study of like communication, but also like theory of mind. And of course, with the LLMs, where you now have the ability for like humans to talk to machines and machines to talk back to humans in ways that they understand, really what effective liberal arts, or at least like English study, leads you to is like understanding desire, like what people want, what motivates them to want those things, how to communicate things to folks that such that they understand that they want it, and that this vision of a good life aligns with what their aspirations are. And then the mechanism by which you then make that happen is technology. A productive relationship with technology is the means to the end of like living a good life, versus, and I think you kind of have this where if you're not careful, you can end up with technology as a mechanism to like hack attention loops or things that historically were effective adaptively for humans, right? Like, oh, this salty sweet thing is delicious because 200,000 years ago, when we stumble upon a beehive that's full of honey, well, you certainly want to eat those calories, right?
Yeah.
And then very, very clever like food scientists in New Jersey who work for Frito-Lay, figure out how to then make Doritos or Skittles. Then that's one version of technology, and then another version is TikTok and YouTube Shorts and so on and so forth. And so I think the thing that you have to be careful about is like when technology is not the means to the end anymore, but then now is like kind of subverting the end to its own reward function. I want Michael to see technology as a tool to kind of help himself achieve things and also to like serve others in a way that's like a global maximum versus
Mm-hmm.
like a local maximum. He primarily uses technology in the context of like learning. We talk about brain rot, brain slop stuff. I think that these are like attention vampires and kind of like dopamine vampires are something that is present in the modern world, and kids need to be super aware of these things because I think that we're going to see kind of the outputs of that in the next 5 to 10 years as like the first. I mean, I'm already seeing it in my industry where like the first kids who were kind of raised on iPhones are coming into the work environment and like are petrified of having like verbal synchronous conversations,
Right.
right?
Right.
um and that was even before you had short form video. That was essentially just the result of like iMessage and Snapchat intermediated
Right.
communication. That is a separate thing from attention degradation, from short form content, et cetera, et cetera. So like I want Michael to have an effect, like have a good relationship with technology, but also just be aware of the fact that there are people who are out there that will want to use that technology for their ends versus making you successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like you're more of a fan of using, especially as a writer, technology as like an enhancer of creativity or an enabler of creativity than like a substitute for creativity.
Yeah, I think that's well said. The challenge, of course, is like there's a circularity there a little bit. We took Mike to Europe 18 months ago, or I guess it's actually 2 years ago at this point. He was jet lagged out of his mind, and we were in Amsterdam, and so he and I were up at like 2 in the morning, and so we were like, all right, well, like what are we gonna do with this kid? His mom's asleep, and so I was gonna see if I could use ChatGPT 3.5, or I guess it was 4 had maybe just shipped, to generate custom Pokemon, right?
Mm.
Where what that required was him saying like, okay, well, I want it to be this type, like I want it to be a fire type, but also flying, and I want it to look like an eagle, but also it like has fire coming out of its butt, and and it has these special powers right here. And then of course like the LLM is like and like
Yeah.
generates a bunch of like per the prompt I constructed, like generates a bunch of stuff out of that, et cetera, et cetera. If he were, and of course like probably not as a 4-year old, if like the kid was compelled to like sit down and buckle down and actually produce all that, that probably would be better.
Mm.
So that's why like yes, it is a creativity lever there, but also the friction actually does spur creativity, and
Mhm.
then the friction also does create capability. So
I wanted to ask you one of my last couple questions. We're sticking on this topic of AI. You introduced me to the concept of vibe writing, which I have heard of vibe coding. I've now heard of vibe marketing. Vibe
yeah.
writing was a new one for me. And I think the other thing that I learned from you is that Founding Sales is not the only book that you have written. You have, in fact, also vibe written your latest novel, Michael's Hot Dog Stand. This sounds like a project maybe you and Michael did together. So I'm curious about vibe writing Michael's Hot Dog Stand. First, what is it and what did you do here?
Part of this was inspired by some of the challenges I see in our industry around people entering industry that are just not very familiar with the ins and outs of like economics or business. As I've like reflected on this, I think that one, a lot of folks who are entering industry right now, their parents they've been knowledge workers, right? Like maybe
Mhm.
they're a lawyer, or like a software engineer or a marketer or what have you. Whereas maybe those people, their parents were like, maybe they owned a store
Right.
or they had a small business or what have you. And so that generation had more proximity to things like I need like my shoes fixed, and you're going to fix my shoes, and then the labor cost associated with fixing the shoes is a component of what eventually is charged, and so on and so forth. And so there was that kind of observation. I was like, okay, well, like this is a problem, and I think that it's only going to continue to be the case. So I want to like fix this for my son and potentially other folks as well. And then I had been doing a bunch of like experiments using LLMs for like, compressing. So I took founding sales, which is like 400 pages long, and had compressed it to a 100-page kind of like digested version of it. Some of the other things I was thinking about is like taking existing kind of like texts, other texts in the world, like Friedrich Hayek's Use of Knowledge in Society is like one of my favorite economics papers to like share with folks. But if it's not the most complicated thing in the world, but it's also not easy reading. And so I started using LLMs to like kidify these different things. And then at a certain point, it was like, hey, I bet that we could write a parable of commerce, right? Because I'm a big fan of the parable format, like for didactic communication. One of my favorite business books is The Goal. Obviously, there's like Patrick Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions of the Team, Phoenix Project, all those sort of things. I think humans are particularly attuned for narrative consumption and like understanding that, probably from an evolutionary pressure standpoint. And so all this kind of came together to in the form of essentially writing a parable of a kid starting, essentially learning business through the context of going to the park with his dad, being hungry, identifying the fact that there was no food in the park, and he didn't want to leave, had to go home. Hey, maybe someone should be here selling candy bars. Hey, why isn't that you? Okay, let's go do that. How much do the candy bars cost? How much should we sell them for? What's the best alternative in the park? Well, there's a bodega, but it's like 6 blocks away, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, okay. Well, what about more substantial food? And then one of the things that's kind of fun is that you can kind of give the general narrative parameters that you're looking to expound on and like give that to it, and it can like fill in the dialogue back and forth as an example. And again, back to the kind of ambivalence sort of thing. On the one hand, this is why I call it vibe writing. Like, oh, I vibe wrote this, right? Because I don't know, it probably took me 20 hours over like in aggregate, but that probably would have taken like many hundreds of hours if I were to like actually write out the dialogue, and I would have never done it, right? So I think that like on the one hand, it like wasn't fully written, and it also probably like didn't like I probably don't have it in my brain to the same level that I would have if I had actually written it, and maybe it's not of the same quality. Although who knows? Like it's probably better quality. Like Claude's pretty rad. Um, uh, as compared to if I had done it like the old school way. But on the other hand, like this would have never existed. And so now I shared it with the dad's group through my son's school. It's kind of like founding sales. Founding sales started out as Google Doc, and I would like jump into the Google Doc, and there'd be all these like anonymous emus up on the Google Doc. Yeah, reading it. And like the same thing is kind of the case with Michael's hot dog stand. And like so Tracy, and sorry, and then we did like chat gpt image gen kind of images for it, et cetera, et cetera, and she's going to lay it out, and we're going to like throw it up on Amazon, because right now like we have all these parents who are like flinging it around. They're like, yes, this is what we've wanted, right? Like this is so yeah, I wouldn't say that I've written a novel there. I would say that I have vibe written what essentially is the like young adult literature version of if folks are my age, you might remember Lemonade Stand, the video game, way back in the day. This is like the young adult kind of version of that, to kind of like teach core commercial concepts and also just like core like professional concepts.
Oh, I love that. And here on Startup Dad, we always approach things with the most generous interpretation. So I'm going to say you wrote a novel, a children's novel. We can debate that separately. I'm going to give you credit for that. But that sounds amazing. I can't wait to get a copy of it when it's up on Amazon. Okay, last question, and hopefully we have a couple minutes for lightning round. But how can people follow along or be helpful to you?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter, right? I'm the only person named Peter Kazanjy, and don't worry, Google will autocorrect it. when you invariably don't spell it correctly. So that's probably the easiest place to find me there. And then if you ever have people in your life who are need to learn how to sell the software that their or hardware that their company is making, my book Founding Sales is really effective for that. It's available in its entirety for free at foundingsales.com, but you can also buy copies of it as well on Amazon, both EPUB and then also paper based.
Cool. Well, we will send people in that direction. Hopefully, you sell a few more copies from the hordes of people that listen to this podcast. Okay. Lightning round. If you've got the time for it, we will zip through this real fast. What is the most indispensable parenting product you've ever purchased?
I think that was probably the Duna stroller that Michael first cruised around in when he was newborn.
Okay. I believe I heard that also from Darius Contractor, his favorite. What is the most useless parenting product you've ever purchased?
I don't know, probably like one of the many activity books that he ended up not using. I'm not sure that there's a specific one. There's been a number of them.
What is the weirdest thing you've ever found in Michael's pockets or in the washing machine?
It's probably not just the weirdest thing, but I think just like the magnitude of stuff that like is constantly in the pockets. And then the funny thing is that he's got this dresser that also has like a changing table, and obviously we don't change him on it anymore. And so the top is just like full of what he calls treasures, which invariably are things that go into the pockets, come out in the washing machine, and then end up on the treasure pile there. So just like the pure magnitude.
The volume of treasures that you discover.
Yeah, so many treasures.
Okay, true or false? There's only one correct way to load the dishwasher.
In our household, it's false. Like I've just given up on that. They can like do it however they want.
I'm sensing in your mind there is one way, but you've succumbed to the external pressures. So
yeah, there's like coaching around the edges, but we're not going to be like super rigorous about
pick
this.
your battles, I suppose. What is your signature dad superpower?
Making my son laugh.
Aha. Crazier block of time in your house, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. or 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.?
Oh, definitely the morning.
Okay.
Yeah. Michael is not a morning person.
He's not a morning person. Okay. Are you a morning person?
Yes.
Were you one before kids?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Way to go. The ideal day with Michael involves which one activity? Is that exploratorium?
Yes.
If he had to describe you in one word, what would it be?
Funny.
What is the most frustrating thing that has ever happened to you as a dad?
The prototypical thing would be like doing the thing that was required or like was asked for, whether it's like cooking a thing or what have you, and then you deliver it and like the requirements have completely changed, or like it actually wasn't the thing that was wanted.
Yeah. The
Right?
cereal can't
Wasn't
go in the
needed.
bowl before you pour the milk. Now it has to go in after you pour the milk or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Times 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
What is the funniest or / most embarrassing thing Michael's ever said in public?
There was this lady who had a very substantial like septum piercing that was sitting across from us, and Michael asked me kind of loudly, like, why does that man have a nail in his nose? Um, and I was like, we'll talk about that later.
That's awesome. What is your go-to dad wardrobe?
Standard startup outfit, jeans, button-up shirt and Patagonia jacket.
Okay. How many parenting books do you have in your house?
I think it's like the Jonathan Haidt stuff, Lenore Skenazy stuff.
Yeah.
I guess those are our parenting. I think of more just like didactic parenting, like do these specific things versus these are more kind of like pop research, if you will.
Yeah.
So if you count that, probably like a dozen. If you're looking for things like Dr. Spock stuff, no, we don't have any of that.
None of those. Of course, you mentioned Lenore Skenazy. That she's the author of Free Range Kids, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Yeah.
That's right. Exactly.
And pals
Thank
to
you.
Jonathan Haidt. How many parenting books have you actually read cover to cover?
Well, if it's that category, probably like a dozen.
Okay.
But if the prior one's not so much.
No Dr. Spocks. All right. How many dad jokes do you tell on average in a given day?
Probably 2 per commute. So maybe that's probably 2.
2 per commute. What's the most embarrassing thing you've ever done in front of Michael? Or is he not old enough to be embarrassed by you yet?
I don't think he's old enough to be embarrassed just yet. Like I communicate with his friends quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
and other folks, and I'm doing that on purpose to like demonstrate, right? Like one of the things we talk about is like when I asked that person that question, how did it make them feel? What were they thinking? Theory of mind exercises. And I think that that kind of makes him a little bit uncomfortable, but mainly because he's like getting better at it.
Yeah. What is the most absurd thing that Michael's ever asked you to buy for him?
It's probably just, again, just like the magnitude of like Pokemon cards is the biggest thing there.
I recall that 7 to 8 year old phase. It's all Pokemon all the time. So, what's the
Yeah.
most difficult kids TV show you've had to sit through?
I think that probably the most difficult kids TV show we had to sit through was like Blippi initially, and then we're like, okay, we're done. And then Blippi then proceeded to like precipitated a kids TV show ban in our household,
Yes,
which is
yes.
probably not a bad thing.
Don't ever go down the rabbit hole of researching the history behind that guy from Blippi. You will
Oh
be
goodness,
appalled
you're
by what you
frightening me.
find out. What is your
Okay.
favorite kids movie?
I think probably right now our favorite movie is Avatar. What is it? The Last Airbender.
Do you have a nostalgic movie that you cannot wait to force Michael to watch when he's old enough?
We haven't watched Ghostbusters yet, so I'm looking forward to that because it's,
Classic of the
well,
genre.
exactly.
What is the worst experience you've ever had assembling a kid's toy or piece of furniture?
Probably the worst experience I've had was disassembling a Lego kit and proceeding to break a tooth while doing that, much to my father's chagrin, who has always warned not to do that.
Oh,
So that's probably
no.
the worst experience.
Worst and possibly most expensive. How often do you tell Michael back in my day stories?
I don't think we've gotten into those yet. Maybe I'll
Okay.
up my requirements there.
It's coming. Do you have a favorite dad hack for road trips or flights?
Yeah. So we were just in New York recently, and these were two things that I kind of stumbled upon that I wish I'd known earlier. I think restaurants are probably like a subgenre
Mm-hmm.
of this as well. So small Lego kits are amazing for this. So like Lego kits of like 50, 100 pieces or whatever. Michael used to call them restaurant Legos because like it's enough time. It's like 60 minutes to like lock them in. And then there's another kind of like related, toy called Brain Flakes that are kind of like friction-based magnetiles. So instead of being magnets, it's like these little things that look like snowflakes. The kids can use them to kind of like put stuff together. Those are particularly good on flights and kind of drives because you don't need like specific pieces in a specific order like Legos. Any brain flake can be used to like, proceed on the building the thing that they're trying to build. So the hard thing is like before they can read, what do you do with them? And
Yeah.
like I'm not a fan of braining them with an iPad. And so I think that those are kind of two good approaches.
Okay. So if it's a stationary thing like a restaurant, do the mini Lego packs. If it's a moving target, brain flakes.
Nailed it.
Okay. Finally, speaking of moving targets, what is your take on minivans?
I think they're great. We don't have a car, but I grew up, in Southern California being ferried around in one. And then it was my first car in high school. I think they're absolutely fantastic.
Okay. Team minivan right here. Would your wife
Mhm.
agree?
Probably, but we'd live in the city, so she's more of a cargo bike person. But I think if we had to, like, I'm not minivans are great.
Okay. All right. Just the need has not arisen yet. So
Not yet, yeah.
All right. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining me today and dropping some knowledge on me and fellow dads everywhere. I wish you, Michael, and your wife, Tracy, all the best for the rest of the summer and the rest of your year. Great to meet you.
Thanks, Adam. Have a great rest of your day, okay?
Thank you for listening to today's episode with Peter Kazanjy. You can subscribe and watch the show on YouTube or whatever you get your podcasts. Visit www.startupdadpod.com to learn more and browse past episodes. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.